Snow blanketed the Kansas plains on December 24, 1944, transforming the landscape into a frozen wasteland that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. At Camp Concordia, the largest German prisoner of war facility in the United States, over 4,000 captured soldiers, nurses, and civilians huddled in wooden barracks against the bitter cold. The camp sprawled across the prairie like a small city, its guard towers rising above rows of identical buildings, all surrounded by double fences topped with barbed wire. The facility had been constructed in record time during 1943, as the United States found itself housing an unprecedented number of Axis prisoners. By late 1944, America held over 400,000 German, Italian, and Japanese POWs across more than 500 camps scattered throughout the country. Camp Concordia represented the pinnacle of this massive undertaking, a testament to American organizational capability and commitment to international law. Sergeant James Mitchell pulled his wool coat tighter as he began his evening patrol through the women's quarters. The son of German immigrants, Mitchell spoke fluent German, a skill that had made him invaluable to the camp administration. His grandparents had fled Prussia decades earlier, seeking the promise of America, never imagining their grandson would one day guard prisoners from their homeland. The irony wasn't lost on him as he walked through the compound, his breath forming white clouds in the frigid air. The complexity of his position weighed heavily on Mitchell's mind. He had grown up hearing stories of the old country, learning German folk songs at his grandmother's knee, and celebrating traditional holidays with sauerkraut and Stalin. Now, at 26 years old, he found himself responsible for the welfare of people who shared his cultural heritage, but had fought against everything he believed in. The war had created these impossible contradictions, turning families against nations and heritage against duty. The women's barracks housed approximately 200 female prisoners, mostly nurses and medical auxiliaries captured during the German retreat from France and Italy. Many had arrived in deplorable condition after weeks aboard overcrowded transport ships, their bodies ravaged by malnutrition and disease. Camp medical records documented cases of women weighing less than 75 pounds upon arrival, their frames skeletal after months of inadequate rations during the chaotic final stages of the war in Europe. These women represented a unique challenge for the American military. Unlike male soldiers who were expected in warfare, female prisoners required different considerations. Many were medical professionals who had served in field hospitals, treating wounded German soldiers under increasingly desperate conditions. Others were civilians caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, swept up in the chaos of retreating armies and advancing Allied forces. The journey to America had been particularly brutal for these women. Packed into cargo holds of Liberty ships, they had endured weeks of seasickness, inadequate food, and unsanitary conditions. Many arrived with dysentery, scurvy, and other diseases associated with prolonged malnutrition. The camp's medical staff had worked tirelessly to restore their health, following strict protocols that emphasized rehabilitation over punishment. As Mitchell approached the third barracks, a faint sound caught his attention. He paused, listening carefully above the wind that howled across the plains. There it was again, a weak groan coming from inside the building. Following protocol, he entered the dimly lit barracks, where most of the women were already asleep in their narrow bunks. The building was warmer than outside, heated by a central coal stove, but still uncomfortably cold. The barracks had been designed for efficiency rather than comfort. Rows of double-decker bunks lined the walls. Each prisoner allocated a small footlocker for personal belongings. Windows were barred but not boarded, allowing natural light during the day while maintaining security. The floors were wooden planks that creaked underfoot, and the walls were thin enough that conversations could be heard from neighboring rooms. Moving quietly between the rows of beds, Mitchell followed the sound to a bunk near the back corner. There, he discovered a young woman lying motionless, her face gaunt and pale in the weak light filtering through the frosted windows. He recognized her as one of the nurses who had arrived 3 weeks earlier on a transport from the East Coast. She appeared to be in her early 20s, though malnutrition had aged her features beyond her years. Her name was listed in the camp records as Greta Hoffmann, a former Luftwaffe medical auxiliary who had been captured near Cherbourg during the Allied advance through Normandy. According to her file, she had served in a field hospital that treated wounded German pilots and air crew. The facility had been overrun during the rapid Allied advance, and she had been among dozens of medical personnel taken prisoner. Mitchell knelt beside the bunk and gently touched her shoulder. She didn't respond. Her skin felt cold and clammy, and when he checked her pulse, it was weak and irregular. The woman's uniform hung loosely on her emaciated frame, and Mitchell estimated she couldn't weigh more than 70 pounds. According to the medical files he'd seen, she hadn't been able to keep solid food down for over a week, surviving only on small sips of water and thin broth. The medical records painted a grim picture of her condition. She had lost nearly 40 pounds since her capture, dropping from a healthy pre-war weight of around 110 pounds to her current critical state. The camp physicians had tried various approaches to encourage eating, including offering familiar German foods and allowing other prisoners to assist with feeding, but nothing had been successful. The Geneva Convention mandated humane treatment of prisoners of war, and the United States military had implemented strict protocols to ensure compliance. Camp Concordia operated under detailed guidelines that required immediate medical attention for any prisoner showing signs of severe illness or malnutrition. Mitchell had been specifically trained to recognize emergency situations and respond accordingly. These protocols had been developed through hard-won experience. Early in the war, some camps had struggled with prisoner mortality due to inadequate medical care and poor understanding of malnutrition treatment. By 1944, the U.S. military had refined its approach, establishing comprehensive medical procedures that rivaled those available to American civilians in many rural areas. Without hesitation, he carefully lifted the unconscious woman into his arms, surprised by how little she weighed. Her body felt fragile, like a bird with hollow bones, and he could feel her ribs through the thin fabric of her uniform. As he carried her toward the door, several other women stirred in their bunks, watching silently as the American guard cradled their fellow prisoner with unexpected gentleness. The sight of an American soldier carrying a German prisoner with such care challenged everything these women had been taught about their captors. Nazi propaganda had painted Americans as brutal materialists who showed no mercy to prisoners. Yet here was evidence of the opposite. A moment of human compassion that transcended national boundaries and military objectives. The journey across the camp took several minutes, Mitchell's boots crunching through the snow as he navigated between buildings. The woman remained unconscious, her head resting against his shoulder, her breathing shallow but steady. Other guards on patrol nodded respectfully as they passed, understanding the gravity of the situation. The camp's medical protocols were well established, and every guard knew their responsibility to preserve life, regardless of nationality. The camp's layout had been carefully planned to facilitate both security and medical emergencies. Wide paths connected all major buildings, allowing for rapid movement of personnel and equipment. The hospital was centrally located, easily accessible from all barracks, and staffed around the clock with both American medical personnel and German prisoners who had medical training. As they approached the main mess hall, the rich aroma of roasting turkey filled the cold night air. The kitchen staff had been preparing for days, following orders from the camp commander to provide a traditional American Christmas feast for all prisoners. This wasn't merely an act of seasonal generosity. It was part of a deliberate policy designed to demonstrate American values and counter Nazi propaganda that portrayed Americans as brutal and inhumane. The preparation for this feast had required enormous logistical coordination. Tons of food had been shipped from across the Midwest, including fresh turkeys from Iowa farms, cranberries from Wisconsin bogs, and potatoes from Idaho. The quantities were staggering, enough to feed over 4,000 prisoners plus the camp's American personnel, all while maintaining the high standards expected of a traditional Christmas dinner. The mess hall had been transformed for the occasion. Pine branches collected from nearby trees decorated the walls, and handmade ornaments crafted by both guards and prisoners hung from the rafters. Long tables were arranged in rows, each set with real plates and silverware rather than the usual metal trays. The scene represented a stark contrast to the harsh realities of war, a temporary oasis of normalcy in an abnormal world. The decorations themselves told a story of cooperation between captors and captives. German prisoners with artistic skills had crafted paper ornaments and painted murals depicting winter scenes that could have been from either Kansas or Bavaria. American guards had contributed family photographs and personal mementos, creating a shared space that belonged to neither side, exclusively but to both together. Mitchell entered the hall, immediately drawing the attention of the kitchen staff and medical personnel who were making final preparations. Dr. Captain Reynolds, the camp's chief medical officer, hurried over upon seeing the unconscious woman in Mitchell's arms. Reynolds was an experienced physician who had treated hundreds of malnourished prisoners since the camp's establishment, and he quickly assessed the situation. Dr. Reynolds had been specially selected for his position based on both his medical expertise and his understanding of the psychological aspects of prisoner care. A graduate of Johns Hopkins Medical School, he had volunteered for military service despite being exempt due to his age and profession. His approach to treating POWs emphasized dignity and respect, recognizing that psychological healing was as important as physical recovery. They carefully placed the woman on a table near the kitchen, where Reynolds could examine her properly. Her condition was critical but not hopeless. Severe malnutrition had weakened her body's ability to process food, requiring a careful refeeding protocol to avoid potentially fatal complications. The doctor ordered small amounts of warm broth to be administered slowly and monitored constantly. The medical team that assembled around the unconscious nurse represented the camp's commitment to professional health care. In addition to Dr. Reynolds, there were 2 American nurses, a German prisoner who had been a physician in civilian life, and a medical technician trained specifically in treating malnutrition cases. This collaborative approach, with former enemies working together to save lives, exemplified the camp's unusual atmosphere. As the medical team worked, the woman's eyelids began to flutter. She stirred slightly, her senses gradually awakening to the warmth of the hall and the incredible aromas surrounding her. When her eyes finally opened, they were filled with confusion and fear. She had expected punishment, perhaps even death, but instead found herself surrounded by concerned faces and the smell of more food than she had encountered in months. Her first conscious moments in the mess hall represented a profound psychological shock. Everything she had been taught about Americans suggested she should expect brutality, starvation, and humiliation. Instead, she found herself the center of medical attention, surrounded by the aromas of an abundant feast, and treated with a gentleness that seemed impossible given the circumstances. Mitchell spoke to her softly in German, his voice gentle and reassuring. He explained that she was safe, that they were there to help her, and that she would receive proper medical care. The woman's eyes filled with tears as she struggled to comprehend the situation. Everything she had been taught about American brutality seemed to crumble in that moment, replaced by an incomprehensible reality of kindness and concern. The conversation that followed, conducted in whispered German, revealed the depth of her confusion and disbelief. She asked repeatedly if this was some kind of trick, if the kindness was a prelude to torture or execution. Mitchell patiently explained the camp's policies, the medical care available to all prisoners, and the upcoming Christmas celebration that would include everyone, regardless of nationality. The Christmas feast at Camp Concordia was the result of careful planning and significant expense. The menu included roast turkey with traditional stuffing, mashed potatoes, giblet gravy, cranberry sauce, green beans, dinner rolls with butter, and pumpkin pie for dessert. The quantities were staggering by wartime standards, representing more food than most prisoners had seen since before the war began in 1939. For many German POWs, the abundance was almost overwhelming after years of increasingly meager rations. The logistics of preparing such a feast were mind-boggling. The camp's kitchen staff, augmented by prisoner volunteers, had been working for 3 days straight. Dozens of turkeys had been roasted in massive ovens. Hundreds of pounds of potatoes had been peeled and mashed, and gallons of gravy had been prepared from scratch. The cranberry sauce alone required several hundred pounds of fresh cranberries, a luxury that many Americans couldn't afford during wartime rationing. This generosity wasn't accidental or purely humanitarian. It was part of a sophisticated psychological warfare strategy designed to undermine Nazi propaganda and demonstrate American superiority through moral example rather than force. Military planners understood that well-treated prisoners would return to Germany after the war with positive stories about American values, potentially influencing post-war relations and reconstruction efforts. The strategic thinking behind such policies had been developed at the highest levels of the U.S. military and government. Officials recognized that the treatment of prisoners would be scrutinized after the war and could significantly impact America's international reputation. More immediately, they understood that humane treatment led to better cooperation from prisoners, valuable intelligence gathering, and fewer security problems within the camps. As evening approached, the mess hall filled with both guards and prisoners preparing for the Christmas celebration. A mixed choir had been rehearsing for weeks, preparing to perform Silent Night in both English and German. The sight of former enemies singing together represented something unprecedented in modern warfare, a moment when shared humanity transcended national boundaries and military objectives. The choir itself had been formed spontaneously, when guards discovered that many German prisoners had excellent singing voices and knew traditional Christmas carols. What began as informal singing during work details had evolved into organized rehearsals and planned performances. The repertoire included German carols, American Christmas songs, and international pieces that both groups could sing together. The young nurse was helped to a chair near the kitchen, where medical staff could monitor her condition while she slowly consumed small spoonfuls of warm broth. Each sip was a victory, her body gradually accepting nourishment after days of rejection. Other German women gathered around her, their own eyes wide with amazement at the treatment they were witnessing. The broth had been specially prepared according to medical protocols for treating severe malnutrition. It contained carefully balanced nutrients designed to restart her digestive system without overwhelming it. Dr. Reynolds monitored her response closely, watching for signs of improvement or distress that might require immediate intervention. Among the prisoners were women who had served as nurses on the Eastern Front, where they had witnessed unspeakable horrors. Others had worked in field hospitals during the retreat from France, treating wounded soldiers under constant bombardment. Many had lost family members to Allied bombing raids or had seen their homes destroyed. Yet here, in this Kansas prison camp, they were being treated with a dignity and respect that seemed impossible given the circumstances. These women brought with them stories of incredible hardship and loss. Some had been separated from their families for years, with no knowledge of whether their loved ones were alive or dead. Others had witnessed the collapse of everything they had believed in, watching as the Third Reich crumbled around them. The kindness they encountered at Camp Concordia provided a stark contrast to the brutality they had experienced and witnessed during the war. The feast began at 6 o'clock, with guards and prisoners sitting together at the same tables sharing the same food. This integration was intentional, designed to humanize both captors and captives in each other's eyes. American soldiers shared stories of their own families and Christmas traditions, while German prisoners spoke of their homes and loved ones left behind. Language barriers were overcome through gestures, smiles, and the universal language of shared meals. The conversations that took place during the meal revealed the common humanity that existed beneath the uniforms and national identities. American guards spoke of missing their own families during the holidays, while German prisoners shared memories of Christmas celebrations in their homeland. Many discovered they had similar backgrounds, similar hopes, and similar fears about the future. For the recovering nurse, each small bite of food represented not just physical nourishment but emotional healing. The cranberry sauce was sweet and tart, unlike anything she had tasted before. The turkey was tender and flavorful, prepared with herbs and seasonings that seemed exotic after years of bland military rations. The mashed potatoes were creamy and rich, providing the calories her body desperately needed to begin the long process of recovery. The sensory experience of the meal was overwhelming for someone who had been starving. The textures, flavors, and aromas combined to create an almost overwhelming assault on senses that had been deprived for so long. Each bite required careful attention from the medical staff, ensuring that her weakened digestive system could handle the rich foods without adverse reactions. Mitchell remained nearby throughout the evening, checking on her progress and translating when necessary. He found himself thinking about his own German heritage and the complex emotions that came with guarding people who shared his ancestral language and culture. The war had created artificial divisions between people who, in different circumstances, might have been friends or even family. The personal connection Mitchell felt with the prisoners created internal conflicts that many German-American guards experienced. They understood the language, the cultural references, and the homesickness that the prisoners felt. At the same time, they were loyal Americans who had sworn to serve their country against the very nation these prisoners represented. As the evening progressed, the choir performed their carefully rehearsed songs. Silent Night had been written in Austria over a century earlier, and hearing it sung in both languages created a powerful moment of shared cultural heritage. Many prisoners wept openly, overwhelmed by memories of Christmas celebrations in their homeland and the unexpected kindness they were experiencing in captivity. The performance of Silent Night was particularly moving because it represented a piece of culture that belonged to both sides. The song had been composed in 1818 in Oberndorf, Austria, and had spread throughout the German-speaking world before being translated into dozens of languages. Hearing it sung simultaneously in English and German created a bridge between the two cultures that transcended the temporary divisions created by war. The camp's photographer documented the evening, creating a visual record that would later serve multiple purposes. These images would be used in military reports, propaganda materials, and historical archives. They showed clean, well-fed prisoners enjoying abundant food in decorated surroundings, a stark contrast to the brutal conditions in Axis prison camps that were beginning to be discovered as Allied forces advanced into Germany. The photographs taken that evening would become important historical documents, providing visual evidence of America's commitment to humane treatment of prisoners. They would be used in post-war trials, diplomatic negotiations, and historical research. More immediately, they served as proof to skeptical officials that the expensive policy of generous treatment was being properly implemented. Dr. Reynolds monitored the nurse's progress throughout the evening, noting improvements in her color and alertness as she slowly consumed small portions of the feast. Her body was beginning to respond to proper nutrition, though full recovery would take months of careful medical supervision. The doctor had treated dozens of similar cases, and he understood the delicate balance required to restore health to severely malnourished patients. The medical protocols developed for treating severe malnutrition had been refined through experience with hundreds of prisoners. The process required patience, careful monitoring, and gradual increases in food quantity and complexity. Too much food too quickly could cause fatal complications, while too little would prolong the recovery process unnecessarily. The other German women at the table shared their own stories of arrival at the camp. Many described the shock of receiving adequate food, clean clothing, and medical care after expecting torture or execution. Letters they had written home, heavily censored but still revealing, spoke of their amazement at American treatment. These letters would later be studied by intelligence analysts seeking to understand the effectiveness of the humane treatment policy. The letters written by prisoners provided valuable intelligence about the effectiveness of American policies. Censors noted recurring themes of surprise, gratitude, and confusion about the generous treatment. Many prisoners wrote that they could not believe what they were experiencing, that it contradicted everything they had been taught about Americans. As midnight approached and Christmas Day officially began, the celebration took on an almost surreal quality. Here, in the middle of a global war that had claimed millions of lives, former enemies were sharing a peaceful meal and singing together. The nurse, now able to sit upright and speak in whispers, expressed her gratitude in broken English, the few words she had learned from sympathetic guards. The transition from Christmas Eve to Christmas Day was marked by a moment of silence, followed by the singing of O Holy Night in both languages. The moment represented something unprecedented in modern warfare, a temporary suspension of hostilities in favor of shared humanity and common celebration. The abundance of food served that night had multiple symbolic meanings. For the Americans, it demonstrated their nation's agricultural and logistical superiority, showing that they could feed their enemies better than those enemies had been able to feed themselves. For the German prisoners, it represented a glimpse of American prosperity and values that contradicted everything they had been taught about their captors. The symbolic power of the feast extended beyond mere nutrition. It represented American abundance, organizational capability, and moral confidence. The United States was demonstrating that it could afford to be generous even with its enemies, that its resources were so vast that feeding thousands of prisoners lavishly was merely a minor expense. Camp Concordia's Christmas feast was not unique. Similar celebrations occurred at POW camps across the United States, all following guidelines established by the War Department. These events were carefully planned and documented, serving both humanitarian and strategic purposes. The policy of generous treatment was based on practical considerations as well as moral ones, recognizing that well-treated prisoners caused fewer problems and might become allies in post-war reconstruction efforts. The nationwide scope of these celebrations demonstrated the systematic nature of American prisoner treatment policies. From camps in Texas to facilities in New York, the same standards of care and the same commitment to humane treatment were maintained. This consistency was crucial to the policy's success and to America's post-war reputation. The nurse's recovery became a symbol of the broader transformation occurring throughout the camp. As she gained strength over the following days and weeks, she began to assist in the camp hospital, using her medical training to help other prisoners and even American personnel when needed. Her story spread throughout the compound, becoming part of the growing narrative that challenged Nazi propaganda about American brutality. Her gradual return to health paralleled the broader changes occurring among the prisoner population. As physical health improved and psychological barriers broke down, many prisoners began to question the beliefs that had brought them to war. The cognitive dissonance between Nazi propaganda and American reality created opportunities for genuine transformation. Mitchell continued to check on her progress, developing a professional relationship that transcended the usual boundaries between guard and prisoner. Their conversations in German provided insights into the experiences of German medical personnel during the war, information that proved valuable to military intelligence while also fostering mutual understanding and respect. The relationship that developed between Mitchell and the recovering nurse exemplified the complex human connections that formed in the camps. Professional duty, personal heritage, and simple human compassion combined to create bonds that transcended national boundaries and military objectives. The Christmas celebration at Camp Concordia represented more than just a seasonal tradition. It demonstrated the power of treating enemies as human beings, showing that mercy and strength were not mutually exclusive. The policy of humane treatment required significant resources and careful planning, but it paid dividends in terms of camp security, prisoner cooperation, and long-term strategic objectives. The success of the humane treatment policy would be measured not just in immediate results, but in long-term outcomes. The prisoners who experienced American generosity would return to Germany with stories that would influence post-war attitudes and relationships. The investment in kindness would pay dividends for decades to come. As winter gave way to spring, the nurse's health continued to improve. She gained weight steadily, her color returned, and her strength slowly rebuilt. More importantly, her worldview had been fundamentally altered by her experience. The America she discovered bore no resemblance to the brutal, materialistic nation described in Nazi propaganda. Instead, she found a country confident enough in its values to treat its enemies with dignity and respect. Her physical recovery was matched by a psychological transformation that would prove even more significant. The woman who had arrived as a dedicated servant of the Third Reich was gradually becoming someone who questioned the fundamental assumptions that had guided her life. The process was slow and sometimes painful, but it was genuine and lasting. The documentation from Camp Concordia and similar facilities would later influence post-war policies regarding prisoner treatment and international humanitarian law. The success of the American approach demonstrated that adherence to the Geneva Convention was not just morally correct, but strategically advantageous. Well-treated prisoners became ambassadors for American values, carrying positive messages back to their homeland after the war's end. The lessons learned from the POW camps would influence American foreign policy for generations. The demonstration that enemies could be transformed into friends through generous treatment would become a cornerstone of American diplomatic strategy, applied in various forms during the Cold War and beyond. The young nurse's story, multiplied by thousands of similar experiences across hundreds of camps, contributed to the foundation of post-war German-American relations. Former prisoners returned home with stories of American fairness and generosity, helping to counter Soviet propaganda and laying the groundwork for Germany's eventual integration into the Western Alliance. The cumulative impact of these individual transformations was enormous. Hundreds of thousands of German prisoners returned home with positive impressions of America, creating a reservoir of goodwill that would prove crucial during the post-war Reconstruction period and the emerging Cold War. On that cold Christmas Eve in Kansas, when Sergeant Mitchell lifted a 70-pound German nurse and carried her to a feast of abundance, he participated in something larger than a single act of mercy. He helped demonstrate that America's true strength lay not in its ability to destroy enemies, but in its capacity to transform them into friends through the simple but powerful act of treating them as fellow human beings. The snow continued to fall outside Camp Concordia as the celebration wound down, but inside the mess hall, something had changed forever. In the warmth of that decorated room, surrounded by the aroma of Christmas dinner and the sound of carols sung in 2 languages, the artificial barriers of war had temporarily dissolved, revealing the shared humanity that no amount of propaganda could permanently obscure. Hey there. If you enjoyed learning about this incredible true story from World War II, please give this video a thumbs up. It really helps our channel reach more people who love history. If you're not already subscribed, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you won't miss any of our future deep dives into fascinating historical events like this one. We'd absolutely love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Did this story surprise you? Have you heard similar accounts from your own family members who lived through this era? Or maybe you know of other examples where enemies became friends through acts of kindness during wartime? Share your stories and join our amazing community of history enthusiasts. Your engagement means the world to us and helps us continue bringing these important, untold stories to light. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.